Pyongyang's missiles can now go in any direction, and this is a threat that is now moving out of the region and is becoming global. We were unwilling to negotiate our way to the negotiating table, and I think that's the mistakes of the past.
How long is the U.S. willing to wait?
Well, we've got to see a real change on the part of the posture of the regime in North Korea. Now, how do we see that? Well, we'll wait as long as it takes, as long as the threat is manageable.
Isn't that a version of strategic patience?
We will know it when we see it.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson at the State Department today talking North Korea as we have some new polls out today. What poses the greatest immediate threat to the U.S.? This tracks with what we're seeing. North Korea at 38%. What will stop North Korea's nuclear weapons program? U.S. military force is the answer that gets 51% of people's vote in this poll. And the other question, U.S. taking military action to stop North Korea's nuclear program. In this poll, registered voters 53 to 39. Let's bring in our panel. Tom Rogan, columnist for National Review and contributor to the Washington Examiner. Karen Tumulty, national political correspondent for the Washington Post, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Tom, thoughts on the interview?
Yeah, I think the first thing that came out was interesting is that Secretary Tillerson backed away from this notion that Kim Jong-un might be mentally unstable. That is a belief that I think Tillerson, reflecting the U.S. intelligence community, other allied intelligence services such as in Europe are not so sure about that.
Well, let's play that soundbite real quick.
Yeah.
This is when I asked him about Kim Jong-un.
All indications are that he is not crazy. He may be ruthless, he may be a murderer, he may be someone who, in many respects, we would say by our standards is irrational, but he is not insane. And indications are in the past that when certain events have happened, he has made rational choices.
And obviously they're hoping he does it again.
And I think the vector that they're going, the evolution in language is such that I thought it was very interesting when he said, you know, that the idea here is to provide for North Korea to become part of the community of nations, economic growth, stability, moving away from that notion of regime change, existentialism, which is so crucial to the North Korean-China issue, and specifically putting that subtle element. You see when he talks about confidential influence with China, that really informs that the Chinese do not want to be seen as bowing to President Trump, but are actively working on it.
And Karen, he goes up to the United Nations to speak to the United Nations Security Council tomorrow, and clearly the president has not had great things to say about the UN, but this administration is now tapping all allies on this issue.
And I was glad that you pressed him on what exactly is different about this policy than what we saw during the Obama administration, and his answer seemed to be more, and we're pushing harder on all fronts. But the other thing I was really struck by is, I wonder why he doesn't do interviews like this more often, because as much as Secretary Tillerson has sort of held the media at arm's length, and especially the State Department press corps, he really seems comfortable in a setting like this. He doesn't speak in, diplomatic ease, and, I thought he was answering your questions pretty directly.
Yep, Charles.
I thought the way he answered your question about isn't your policy just a version of the Obama policy of strategic patience, and he dodged it. I thought that was a clever answer, because they seem, at least in the short term, to have decided that a freeze of the program is enough. There are three possible objectives: regime overthrow, an abolition of the program, or a freeze of the program. So what Tillerson pointed out was that as a result of, they're saying, as a result of the pressure by the United States in two occasions over the last 10 days when you might have expected a new nuclear test, and we all were expecting it, it didn't happen. That was the dog that didn't bark, which I think is an achievement. I think the message has been either directly or probably through the Chinese, if you do that, if you explode a nuclear weapon, there's going to be activity by the Americans, and you're not going to like it, and we're not going to like it. So I think it has achieved that objective. The question that you were asking is, are you willing to have that as enough? Is that enough that you don't get any more missile tests and any more nuke tests, which I think probably is all that we're going to get short of war, and then I think is an important objective, because it means If they can't test the missiles and they can't test the nukes, it's not operational. It is a way to kick the can, but it does actually stop the program. To get it abolished, which is what he talked about, abolish the program, will bring you into the community of nations, will make you economically strong. That is not going to work. The North Koreans are not interested in that. They like, at least the regime likes their system. They're not going to become Western. So I think that seems to be their policy for now. You freeze the program and you get the Chinese to back you.
Tom, you know, at the same time, you had Admiral Harry Harris, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, up on Capitol Hill today, saying there is no doubt in his mind and in the intelligence that Kim Jong-un wants to get a nuclear missile that's capable of reaching the U.S., that is 100% what they are on their way to going to do.
And I think what the Trump administration is trying to do now in concert with the Chinese is to alter the strategic calculus that Kim Jong-un, you know, as the intelligence community perceives it, is trying to have that capacity because it insulates him from the Saddam Hussein effect, right? That the growing pursuit instigates American military action. If you have the capability to strike the West Coast, to strike Hawaii, then perhaps the United States would back off. But the differential, I think, is that because of the unstable nature of the regime, and I also, Admiral Harris, speaking yesterday, talked about the North Koreans, the ballistic missile submarine that is now, he said, operational. That introduces, there's an urgency now, which I think is informing a lot of the Trump administration, because yes, the U.S. Navy is fantastic at searching for submarines, but that existential quality to all this is very different than I think any situation we've faced in recent years.
It's also interesting that he talks frequently, he said almost every day, with Defense Secretary Mattis.
Dinner, breakfast, joined at the hip practically. And that also speaks to the fact that I think the Trump foreign policy team, including the National Security Advisor McMaster, people do seem to regard this as the strongest link and in many ways the most reassuring part of the entire administration. There's a real steadiness to them that we haven't seen in other parts of the operation.
Well, yeah, but why aren't they having lunch together? That's what I want to know. No, I think it's remarkable how well the team appears to be, you know, working together.
I mean, think about defense secretaries and secretaries of state in past administrations.
Absolutely.
And national security
Schultz,
advisors.
they've been at each other's throats.
And you mentioned
goes back a long way.
Sorry, Charles. When you mentioned in the interview, one of the challenges, though, is that the absence of filling these offices, right? That it's and the problem is, if you see with Iran earlier in the week, testing the waters again in the Persian Gulf, foreign adversaries love to move at a position of opportunity. So if we have a couple of crises building at the same time, then those pressures are really going to become significant.
We'll talk about more of